Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Thanks for joining us in this brand new episode of Window on the West. We are finally back into the Silmarillion. This week we're going to be on chapter 11 of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. Because we have been in on, if you're listening to this later, we've been doing some in-depth reviews of the greatest show in the history of modern television, The Rings of Power.
The greatest show never told.
The greatest show that never should have been filmed. However, if you're interested in that, go to our YouTube channel. You can follow all the in-depth and other reviews and other videos that we have. But this is back into Tolkien, and we're really thankful to be into it because it was a long slog. And Michael is celebrating.
I'm drinking to the
watching us.
The end of Rings of Power.
He has a celebratory beverage, so maybe he'll get a little loopy later. We'll see. But we're going to read into that. We're going to read chapter 11 here. We're going to go over it, talk about the Sun and the Moon, the Hiding of Valinor. But before we do, we always like to have our special event of
All that is gold does not glitter.
And so today we are going to be looking at how well Michael and Dan know Tolkien and know now the Rings of Power. So, yeah, if you don't want to hear anything about the Rings of Power, go ahead and skip over this here. But we're going to have a little fun here.
So we got away from it, man.
So you guys have to do two things. And some of these are, some of these might be a couple might be a little hard. Yeah, you should get it, though. Two things. One, is it Tolkien or is it Rings of Power? And two, do you know who said it?
Oh.
If it was a character.
What character said it?
What character said it? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. So, number one, well, I don't have a little scorecard here. So, number one, we'll just go off this otherwise. Okay. This one is the harder one. 10,000 thunders, take this fool to prison instead. Tolkien or Rings of Power? I'm starting off with an easy one. No, I'm joking. This is the hardest one, actually, by far. I've stumped you guys. Come on.
I'm going to say this is Tolkien.
All right. Michael? Why? Wait, you're not allowed to fish for Dan's answers? Wait, what? No. You can't do that. Tolkien or Rings of Power?
See, I don't remember it in the Rings of Power. That's my problem. But
Okay.
So
go with your gut.
So I'm going to go with Tolkien.
All right. Good. You guys got it right. This is way too sophisticated for the Rings of Power, honestly. This kind of thing. It's not exactly the highest. Okay. Do you have any idea where it's from, though?
I'm a little stumped on where it would be from, though. I think it's from The Hobbit, maybe.
That's a good guess, but you're wrong.
Michael?
It's not. Is it Farmer Giles?
Boom!
Hey, wow.
Look at that.
Yeah.
It's the king from Farmer Giles of Ham. Wow, how did you know that, man?
I actually, it's just like a spark went off in my brain. I think I remember the part. So
yeah, that's cool. Good job. You both got it right mostly. All right, so next one, perhaps the favorite line I've ever heard in all my years of life: "The wine of victory is sweetest for those in whose bitter trials it has fermented."
I mean, the depth of the use of the passive voice to be passive about being passive about being passive is really just send that fool to prison.
Of which are you exactly speaking of? No.
So this is obviously Rings of Power, and this is not Elrond.
Not Elrond. Do you concur, Daniel Coates?
It's Tolkien, right?
Oh, don't even joke. Not allowed.
Yeah, it's fake Elrond in Rings of Power.
Fake Elrond in the Rings of Power. All right, next. Another great line from Tolkien. Oh, I mean, not from Tolkien. I mean from Tolkien. "For unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward, but up." All right, guys. All right, Dan, I'm going to you first this time.
This is the moral relativism that is taught by Rings of Power.
Do you concur, Michael?
It is.
And Dan, do you know the character who says this?
It's fake Finrod.
Fake Finrod. Good job. Michael, you knew that. I didn't have to ask you. Yeah. Anyway,
that's where he gets into the whole lesson of like, in order to know what the light is, you have to touch the darkness.
The dark. Which,
terrible.
Let's remember, at this point, at the time he's saying that, he's been in Valinor. Feanor hasn't done anything, so there's not a whole lot of darkness to touch at this point. I mean, I guess they've heard of Melkor a little bit, but nothing's really happened in their life. Anyway, all right, let's move on.
I mean, from all they know, since the light is from the two trees, what he's really saying, and this is just another great reason why it makes no sense, is that they have to get on a ship and sail away from Valinor into the darkness so that they know what the light of the two trees looks like. It's so deep.
Let's ruminate on that. Or let's just move on. Okay, good. Let's go on to this next amazing quote. She might have kept alive the very evil she sought to defeat.
You're just trolling us now.
Guys, come on. You guys don't know this stuff? Jeez.
Oh, man.
This is head chief manager Gil-galad. The Rings of Power.
Middle manager Gil-galad.
So what do we decide? It was body positive, High King Steve.
That's right. In Tolkien, in the Two Towers, this is what he says. No. In the Silmarillion, no. But can you name the episode of the Rings of Power?
That would be episode 1.
Yeah, good job. All right. Favorite show ever. All right, there we go. How about this one? I killed Sauron.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Rings of Power.
It's Rings of Power, the only likable elf, Adar.
Adar. He's not an elf, he's an orc. What are you talking about? He's like
an Uruk. He identifies as an Uruk.
Uruk, he identifies as. He's a proto-orc.
That's so funny how many comments I saw online, how everyone was saying the only characters I'm rooting for are Adar and Sauron now.
It's true. It's totally true.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have been manipulated by all the evil elves, essentially.
That's right.
All right. Next line. Nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone. This is a maxim of truths in the world that we must adhere to.
As I was looking at that last quote of like, he's not going to, don't go to DLSs. Please don't go to DLSs. But no, this would be a lot of, this isn't from a single person. This is from all of the dirty little sociopaths called the Harfoots.
That's true.
Amazon claims aren't hobbits, even though on page 3 of the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien clearly states that they're hobbits, that Harfoots are hobbits. But,
I mean, it's a call and response, so you'd have to say it's the dirty little sociopath leader, not just all of them. So he's the one that leads them in the chant. That's why I put the word leader there. However, yes, you are correct.
The now deceased leader.
You probably would have gotten that wrong, Dan, because you haven't read everything that Tolkien's ever written. But no.
It's close. It's very clite to what Tolkien might write.
All right. I think we've got 2 more. Wait. Oh no. Okay. Well, you got this one. Sorry, guys. The metal shouldn't be forced to join, but more drawn or coaxed together. I guess I didn't in our screen, in my slides here, I kind of misplayed this. So you guys know who it is. It's the Rings of Power and our favorite ancient millennial smith.
Yeah, homeless old man.
Homeless old Kella Brimbor, Kella manager, Kella boring. It's obviously the guy who had been working with metals and creating amazing works of art and amazing, I would guess even weaponry and things, anything that his amazing mind would put his hands to. He didn't know how to create alloys.
Metal shouldn't be forced to join. I think they just call that melting in Smith. If you're a smith, right? So metal shouldn't be melted.
I thought it was coaxing. You mentioned that colloquially we call coaxing gravity. So
that's what they showed us. They showed us, here's how you coax, and they hold the metal carefully, and then they just drop it. There you go.
All right.
Coaxed.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, I had it reversed. Okay. So here's our last one. In the end, the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach.
See, this is trying to trick us.
It's Rings of Power and it's Bronwyn.
Nope.
No.
What? Dan?
Wrong
What? No.
It totally is. No.
Oh my gosh.
So the first part of it is said by Bronwyn, I believe. The second part of it, was not. So the whole quote is from Tolkien,
not precisely.
Sam and Morgoth.
Your least favorite line from Tolkien, I know, Dan. It is from the Land of Shadow, Chapter 2, in Return of the King. And look, you guys pretty much, I'll say we got them all right, or you got them all right.
And so,
not hard to tell.
Just thinking forward on this, we now know that the poem about Aragorn was in fact invented by the hobbits and taught to Gandalf, the Harfoots. And we now know
I'd forgotten about that.
We now know the line by Galadriel after she passes her test in the chapter Mirror of Galadriel, that was now from Sauron. So the primary evil dude actually came up with her own line. And so now we know that somehow magically Bronwyn has taught Sam about the shadow 3,500 years later.
It's genetic memory.
Actually, no.
Somehow she married a Harfoot at some point.
So
they come across.
Exactly. This proves that Bronwyn will in fact marry one of the DLSs by the end of this series. So that she can pass on her knowledge through 6 millennia so that Sam can then have it to say at the
That's really cool how they connected everything all together like that.
It all fits.
It's so awesome.
What you're saying, Dan, is you're saying exactly what the writers were thinking. That's exactly what they were thinking, and it's true. They were thinking that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's put this behind us. Next time we won't be quoting the Rings of Power. We'll be doing something a little more fulfilling, heartening.
Back to the books. Back to the books.
Back to the books. That's right. All right. So back to the book, chapter 11 of the Silmarillion, the Quenta Silmarillion, of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. And as usual, we always start with the most impactful statement of the entire day that I will experience probably this entire week, which is
Dan's Big Thought.
All right. Thanks for that intro. So, I guess my big thought this week is that there was a certain theme that kind of struck me while I was reading the chapter. And I think that theme is that, I don't know who said this or just a phrase that I've always heard, but it's always darkest before the dawn. And so you hear the previous chapter, we've seen that the trees have been killed by Melkor and Ungoliant. And so now everyone's just sitting there going, man, everything sucks now. Everything's gone. It all got taken away. So if I could quickly summarize kind of like this one part of the chapter that struck me, it's where Manwë is telling Nienna and Yavanna to exert all their powers of growth and healing upon the dead trees. And the light's all gone. Everything is just shadow now. And we read earlier in the book that the trees were a great work that could only be done once. So in a sense, the work that they're doing is just hopeless. They don't have a chance of bringing the trees back. So Tolkien writes, the tears of Nienna availed not. And then he also writes, Yavanna sang alone in the shadows. And then he writes, as hope failed and the song faltered, Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Laurelin a single fruit of gold. And then Yavanna gives these to Aule, and Manwë hallows them, and Aule makes them into vessels that fly in the sky. And I just was kind of struck with the idea that they're toiling and they're working and they're even singing and they're crying tears and they're just in the dark. They're just in the shadows, and they're doing this with an expectation that it's not going to do anything. It's not going to. So that kind of hit me. Like they're going to do it anyway, and in the end, something good comes out of it.
So are you emphasizing the point at which they're striving without knowing whether they will succeed?
Yeah, because I think like we're told in a previous chapter, was it Yavanna? She said, I can never do this again. I can never make these trees again. And that's before they ask Feanor to give us some of the light from the Silmarils that you've made. And he says, if I break these, I can never do this again. And so it's like this idea, like they're going out and they're going to try to do something, but they know they can't do it again. So I just thought that was interesting, and something good still comes out of it.
Yep. So and of course they're not wrong. Technically, she doesn't bring the trees back to life, so she can't do that again. they do bring forth. It is interesting that it's Yavanna and Nienna together. That's the interesting part to me, is that before it was not, Nienna had no part, but now that there's death and there's something to mourn, Nienna has a part in bringing forth these two, the one flower and the one fruit. So that is interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think it's, like you said, Dan, it's one thing they can only do once. And instead of taking the fruit, which you would think is a seed of sorts, and planting it in the ground again, they put it in the sky so it can't be defeated again, right? They actually they want to keep it apart from the possible destruction that could happen back in Valinor. So I mean, in reading it this time, I realized, well, maybe that's what they did, because it is fruit. They mention it's Telperion bore at last upon a leafless bough one great flower of silver, and Laurelin a single fruit of gold. So I guess maybe you could say the great flower is not enough to bear another tree of sorts, but it was a single fruit of gold. I'm not sure where to go with that exactly, but that they preserve it rather than, like a Silmaril, rather than try to replant it.
Yeah, clearly they understand that though they've produced a single flower and a single fruit, there's nothing more is going to come of that. So they have some thought about that. Or do you think it's rather that they're just trying to protect them, the light from them, because they have the golden light and the silver light? So are they thinking more long? Maybe actually now I'm kind of shifting my opinion. I'm believing more of the latter, and here's why.
That they're protecting it.
Yes.
I agree with that.
At the end of this chapter, they show that their whole motivation is defensive. So it has this section where it talks about how they raise up the mountains, the Pelori, to these sheer walls like glass, which I think is a deliberate reference to the fact that Ungoliant was able to crawl over the mountains the first time and get into Valinor. So now she's not going to be able to, or any of her spawn aren't going to be able to. So they changed the mountains so that you can't get in there. They put a mighty host on the one passage that there is to Valinor. So they're really guarding the place up. But this leads me to something which perhaps the Valar in their wisdom have foreseen and are answering my accusation before I start. So I'll read their answer. I'll tell you my accusation, read their answer. So those of you that have listened to this podcast in the previous episodes know that I'm of the opinion that the Valar err in taking too few actions frequently. So in answer perhaps to me, I laughed when I read this again. In the very first sentence, it says, "It is told after the flight of Melkor that Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom, but they were not idle, as Fëanor declared in the folly of his heart." So perhaps this is the folly of my heart, declaring that they're idle. But to take as so, then it then talks about something really interesting. It says what they were doing. Like, they're not idle. So what were they doing? They have this very interesting line. I wonder what you guys thought of it. "For the Valar work many things with thought rather than with hands, and without voices and silence they may hold counsel with one another." Okay, so they're holding counsel, no big deal. "Thus they held vigil in the night of Valinor, and their thought passed back beyond Ea and forth to the end." So their thoughts passed back and forth, essentially, beyond Ea, beyond the world itself, and forth to the end. I'm presuming the end of everything, of all creation.
I mean, it's a capital E.
Yeah, it's a capital E end. And so this is very interesting. And then, "Yet neither power nor wisdom assuage their grief, and the knowing of evil in the hour of its being." Okay, first of all, to say that this would be the knowing of evil, it's not the knowing of evil for the first time that's affecting them, because Morgoth's already done great evil, and Fëanor's done evil before this, and it didn't affect him this way. So it must be the gravity of the evil with the destruction of the two trees that's affecting them this way. But they are kind of stunned, and they don't, their grief is not assuaged. So we're showing their grief, and then they move on and they say that basically they're mourning. They mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Fëanor. So that was really interesting. So the trees, everyone's sad at the loss of. That seems to be the great crime. But the Valar are mourning the loss of Fëanor. Why? "Of all the works of Melkor, one of the most evil, for Fëanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor and endurance, in beauty and understanding, in skill and strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Ilútar, and a bright flame was in him." See, this is fascinating to me, because what we have here, I think, is a core of Tolkien's philosophy, which is very antithetical to the modern mind, and that is that. So we know that Fëanor is going to do has already done great evil. We've seen the evils that he's done to his own people. He's become thoroughly evil, and yet what the Valar remember, and the reason they mourn, is because the greatest has been marred. They have a purely objective response to the loss of the greatest of the children of Ilúvatar, which is, and that, unlike us, we lose empathy for Fëanor when we hear about the evil that he done. At least I do, and I think others probably do too. But the Valar, they mourn the loss of the greatness and the beauty and the power that was in Fëanor. As humans, we tend to have a reaction where if someone who is tremendously intelligent, powerful, successful, imagine an Elon Musk who is also an Olympic gold medalist and a ruler of a small nation or something like that, and then they fall into corruption. We tend to see their fall as something to be either celebrated or to get angry about what they've done. The Valar see the sadness of the fall of the great, and that's fascinating to me.
I think that certainly goes along with what Tolkien wrote when even he talks about nothing is a monolith, not even a person, right? Meaning that when he was looking at World War II and it was going on, he'd write a letter to his son Christopher, who was fighting. He would talk about how there are plenty of orcs on our side too, and a person in and of itself. I mean, he has a quote about a certain priest who's the worst person in the world, but he still mentions a little bit of a positivity about him. And so even here, I think you're right. You can see that the take on Fëanor isn't that his one deed defined everything about him, but there was the light of what Ilúvatar created in him as the mightiest in all parts of body and mind was something to be mourned.
Yeah. We don't tend to do that. We don't tend to mourn when the mighty who have power and greatness, when they fall. We might have a moment of regret, but mostly we have we lean into the attacks. We lean into opposition if they're actively evil, like Fëanor is right now. So that was fascinating. So their Valar are clearly different. Nevertheless, I'm going to go back to their own quote. They were not idle, as Fëanor declared in the folly of his heart. Okay, so what do they do? Remember, the Noldor have left. Fëanor's left. He's gone to Tirion. He's gathered the elves. They've had their vows. They've gathered their hosts. They've traveled to... Oh, I'm sorry. He went to his home first, and then he went to Tirion. And then they traveled to the coast, and then they had the altercation, and they had the kinslaying. And then they traveled up, and Mandos appeared to them, and the Duwa Mandos. And then, because it says... down at the bottom of that section, but when at last the Valar learned that the Noldor had passed indeed out of Aman and were come back into Middle-earth, they arose and began to set forth in deeds those counsels which they had taken in thought for the rest of evils. So they sit there for at least weeks doing nothing. They don't chase Melkor. They don't. Now you can say, well, anyway, what do you guys think about that? I don't think. I think that just simply making plans in thought is, and what are their plans? Their plans are make the sun and moon, okay, cool, and then build up our defenses around Valinor.
Yeah, they build the greatest moat ever created because it's there's water, there's mysterious islands that send you astray and you'll never find where you're actually heading for if you get into them, right? The Enchanted Isles. They raise up the mountains to be even taller and sheer as glass. They put defenses in the one pass that's left through to Valinor. It's not to be active in the world other than giving the light of the sun and the moon, which does have a good effect against Morgoth because the sun makes him retreat and he feels like he can't stand up to it at all. And so it belches out blackness and darkness. But everything that they do is to hunker down.
What do you guys think about that? To me, that smacks of the Valar not reacting in a manner proportionate or proper to. I'm not saying they have to go to
Is it
war.
so?
Because they do call that out and say that they were afraid to hurt the men, the second children, who they knew were going to be weaker than the elves. So it calls that out. So if that's fair, so don't go to open war. But surely there's something you can do for all of Middle Earth besides just the sun and the moon.
Do you think that their previous engagements with Morgoth, like as Tolkien was writing this and he was thinking about it, do you think he thought like, okay, they would have been certainly hesitant to do more engagement because they brought the elves over, bringing the sheer act of bringing all the elves to Valinor essentially caused the downfall of the trees because of Morgoth's his greed, his envy of the relationship the elves had with the rest of the Valar, right? So is it that they do not want to cause the destruction that they already caused? They don't want to, all their involvement, all their meddling has created these disasters upon them. And so that way they're like, okay, we will stand here and not do much because everything that we've done so far has ended in some sort of tragedy.
So now they're just jumping in shadows. So now I agree with you. It seems like that. It's like, well, whenever we took an active hand, Melkor did stuff, responded to our activity by doing terrible things. So maybe if we just stop doing things, then he won't be as terrible. I don't know. That isn't convincing as far as like guardianship. Guardianship seems more active than that.
I almost wonder if part of it is the doom of Mandos, that they have already decided that with the Noldor being in Middle Earth, it's like they've decided their fate and it's apart from the Valar, and so maybe part of that judgment is that they won't get involved. Maybe that's part of that doom.
Okay. Yeah, I could start to see that a little bit, and maybe this dovetails in with what you were saying too, Jonathan, because perhaps there is an element of, like one of the things that is really powerful in Tolkien is he has a real distrust of power. Whenever people exert power over others, it's almost always shown to be a mistake at some level at some point. And so maybe in his mind, the passive guardianship is better than the active guardianship. Maybe it's better to not exert their power except in the most subtle ways. That might explain the Istari, for example. And the way they didn't send anybody else, or they didn't go themselves over. They can come to Middle Earth without fighting a war. There's no war of wrath required just for them to take a more active hand. But they definitely aim for less active. Also, maybe it's a Iluvatar, right?
That's true. Well, but though you could say like by creating the days, by creating the night, the moon, the sun, the day, they have changed the shape of the world in a way, because Morgoth no longer wants to go out during the day, and so he huddles down in Angband or Tumno, and no longer wants to be out in the sun because he can't even stand the sight of it. It seems that they certainly take a different tack. They're no longer creating giant trees that are lights, right? They no longer have giant lampstands. They did everything that they created to determine the fate of how the world works has been destroyed by Morgoth in shattering and world destroying ways. So it would certainly make me gun shy, I guess.
Right now, I would point out that the sun and moon are very similar to the twin lamps and to the two trees,
except that they're unreachable.
Right, they just seem to be getting better at protecting them.
They've learned from their mistakes there. Yeah. All right, we solved it. Good job, guys.
I can't help but think there's more. There could be more, but having said that, I think it is really worth. There's a glorious quote about the first rising of the sun I wanted to read from.
Let's get into that. So this is to me, it's the most mythological part of the chapter about how the sun works and how the moon works, and the sun chasing the moon and the moon blocking the sun's light and all that sort of stuff. It goes through all of that and how the evening is created. The evening is the most like the sun setting is most like the time of the two trees mingling together. And right, isn't that? Right. Am I remembering that right? Yeah. So anyway, go ahead, Michael. But I think you have more insight into this than I do, because I haven't ever studied this kind of mythology and how it all works together. But maybe you have.
Right. So I'm no mythological expert, but I've read plenty. So the quote that I wanted to read was about the rising of the sun and specifically the rising of the sun, the moon. It said Tilion, Tilion is the Maiar who drives the vessel of the moon. So the moon, the vessel of the moon, which is the flower, the silver flower, is called Isil, and Tilion essentially guides Isil. Tilion had traversed the heaven 7 times and thus was back in the furthest east when the vessel of Arion was made ready. So Arion is the Maya who she's a Maya of flame who was not corrupted by Morgoth. So what you have to think is a good Balrog. Think of a spirit of flame.
That's weird. I had actually written that down.
Oh, really?
That was my note, like a good Balrog. Yeah.
A beautiful good Balrog. I mean, so that everyone, and her eyes are of fire, and no one can look at her. The children of Iluvatar can't even bear to look at her. So she's incredibly powerful. So she drives the sun, the vessel of the sun. So the vessel of the sun is Anar, and her name is Arion. So then Anar rose in glory. This is the vessel of the sun. And the first dawn of the sun was like a great fire upon the towers of the Pelori. These are the mountains of Valinor. The clouds of Middle-earth were kindled, and there was heard the sound of many waterfalls. That's really interesting. That all of a sudden the sound of waterfalls is made clear.
The rising of the sun.
Which is what I think he's saying is the sun rises, and there's a great melting of the ice in the parts of the world where there's ice, and so you have the creation of these massive waterfalls, or glacial drift, as we might call it. Then indeed Morgoth was dismayed, and he descended into the uttermost depths of Angband and withdrew his servants, sending forth great reek and dark cloud to hide his land from the light of the day star. Just beautiful. It's a wonderful, and it kind of gets at the heart of Tolkien's themes of darkness and light. That are so key to everything that he writes. We even see the precursor to Mordor here. It has nothing to do with any breaking of dams and pyroclastic flow, but
no, it does not. Thankfully, doesn't they? I'm trying to find. I didn't mark this quote in my read, but don't they talk about how there was too much light? There was.
Yes, that has to do with the wayward nature of Tilion, the huntsman Maiar that drives the moon. He keeps trying to get close to the sun and burns. So the dark side of the moon is essentially because he keeps trying to get close to the sun.
There. Oh yeah, here I've got the quote. Sorry, it's right there. Because of the waywardness of Tilion, therefore, and yet more because of the prayers of Lorien and Este, who said that sleep and rest had been banished from the earth. Dang. It's a little melodramatic, but okay. Lorien and Este, we know who you are now. And the stars were hidden. Varda changed her counsel and allowed a time wherein the world should still have shadow and half light. It would be like being at the North Pole during the summer. That's essentially what they're kind of saying, is that, like, hey, there was way too much light and people weren't getting the sleep and the rest that they needed. Certainly for elves and the Valar, who had known more of the stars, like the elves woke to the stars. That they hadn't seen the sun, they hadn't seen the light until they were brought to Valinor. Yeah, and that's interesting. I love the whole. It's almost like this chapter needs to be mapped out and how they decide how everything is going to happen because of how, okay, so how are we going to deal with eclipses? All right, so how are we going to deal with the evening and the sunrise and how that looks? All right, okay, and so how are we going to deal with why is the moon random or seemingly random and not as reliable as the sun?
Right, yeah. Right, and why does it have dark spots or a dark side? And what about like you said, eclipses? Yeah. So this is very mythological. So the vessel of the sun reminds me most of the Greek mythologies with Hyperion driving the chariot of the sun. So there's a direct call there, and so there's lots of there are plenty of mythologies. Almost all of them have an explanation for what the sun and often the moon are. So there's quite a few, and this is obviously mythological, like we were saying. It is interesting. It's almost like Tolkien just shifts kind of seamlessly between kinds of narrative. Like we've been learning a lot about. First, like most of the last few chapters have been about. Not the last few, but most of the chapters about the Noldor were about kind of an origin of the fall of the Noldor, kind of like a Genesis story of the fall of the Noldor. But here we're talking about mythological explanations very much like generic or different mythologies from different cultures. And then previous chapter was more like a historical account, and he talks about who the Sindar were and all the different Sindar. He switches between narrative to story to history to mythology and back again. It's very interesting.
It seems almost impossible to do well, and yet it works. Because as you go through this mythological, this great mythology of the sun and the moon, he ties it into the little bits of Feanor, and Ungoliant and Morgoth, Melkor at the time, killing the trees, and that's why we get the sun and the moon. And why does the sun and moon? Well, we've got these two characters. We've got Arion and Tilion, right? Who are Tilion is chasing. He's not as reliable, and it works still because it works within the world that he's created, like the rest of it. So any good story writer will say, like, I'm not going to just create stuff out of thin air. It has to tie back into what I've already created. And he does that throughout this entire chapter, even though it's magnificently odd in a way. It's not after the burning of the ships of that Feanor burns the ships. Like that's dastardly and villainous. And all of a sudden we get into this now story of the sun and the moon. And yeah, you're right. Yeah. He goes so seamlessly from that to history to, characters to mythology. Yeah.
Yeah, he could definitely drive stick, as they say. He's got his literary car has a lot of gears, and he shifts from the historical to the mythological to the narrative.
I don't think Tolkien would like that analogy, considering he was not a fan of the machines. So I think you're going to have to find it.
True. Maybe. Oh yeah. All right. Seasons. How about that?
There you go. Like the changing of the seasons. So go the stories of J.R.R. Tolkien. I think I don't know if we want to go through all the little ins and outs of the sun and moon. You can read through those and talk about how. Well, I think there are two parts of it that I thought were important. One is that indeed Morgoth was dismayed, like you said, and he descended into the uttermost depths of Angband and withdrew his servants, right? But the other one is that neither the sun and the moon can recall the light that was of old that came from the trees before they were touched by the poison. The light now lives in the Silmarils alone. So even then they were saying, like, this light, though it came from the trees, not the same thing. It's not even close to what the light of the trees was like.
That's right. It's not the light of the trees. It's their own light. And one can't help, maybe I'm wrong in this, but I couldn't help. I can't help when I think about the flower and the fruit, thinking that also the vessels crafted by Aule and his Maiar that work with him, that it's kind of like the sun is kind of like the globe, the golden globe of the fruit, plus the vessel crafted by Aule, plus the light of Arion herself. And all kind of in this bundle that we now call the sun, and the same thing with the moon. And so it is kind of fascinating that it's a different kind of light, although very effective. Yeah. I also, that detail that I think I might have mentioned, but the fact that Morgoth does try a retaliatory strike against the moon. The sun's too powerful for him, but he tries the moon. And how does he get there? He can't get there himself because he's been dispersing his spirit, and it specifically calls out that he's getting weaker. But it says that then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, and there was strife and ill men beneath the paths of the stars, but Tilion was victorious. So that's the kind of thing that's pretty cool. I mean, it's such a Tolkienian thing to do, a thing that Tolkien does. How about that? Which is that he just gives you this hint to what could be this whole mythic story about the battle for the moon. And there's these spirits of shadow, and clearly there's going to be the spirits of the stars, and then Tilion himself, and maybe the Valar get involved at some point. But it's pretty cool. So I wanted to show everyone too the version that I'm reading from anyway. It has this cool Ted Nasmith. Are we allowed to show pictures from other
Sure,
people?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, real quick. So this is the rising of the sun against the mountains, the first rising of the sun.
Yeah, I love that picture. Cool. Ted Nasmith is so good at scenery that
yes, that is his strong suit.
Yeah. I the other thing that because of that, right, the that he assailed Tilion and he feared Arion, you could say that what the Valar did diminish him, because for as he grew in malice and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, he might pass into them and was dispersed. And he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. With shadows he hid himself and his servants from Arion, the glance of whose eyes they could no longer endure. Just like the orcs didn't like the sun. I mean, like you could say, like when he imbued his will and power into them, as he changed the elves into orcs, like they could not bear the sun anymore either. And the lands near his dwelling were shrouded in fumes and great clouds. Yeah, and then it's at this point that the Valar raise up the Pelori until they're sheer and dreadful, without a foothold or ledge, faces as hard as glass, and rose up as towers with crowns of white ice. Yeah, and then they hunker down. They're like, we did our duty. You got the sun, you got the moon, you're on your own. Until, save only one, the mightiest mariner of song.
Right, foreshadowing.
That's right.
So, Dan, did you have any additional thoughts? I have one final thought about the philosophy of Tolkien from a quote, but
Sure. Just real quick, I thought it was interesting to me reading through this as someone who's obviously read Lord of the Rings, and how the elves are always like, they have this affinity to stars and they have this affinity to the moon, it seems like, in Lord of the Rings. And I like how Tolkien is kind of like going back in time and explaining that, how they came from a Middle Earth that was just pure starlight. It didn't have any other light. And he also ties it back to like the water, like because they have this journey across the ocean, and it kind of harkens to them at all times. So I had that thought. And then I also liked how Tolkien in this chapter pointed out that the sun is kind of like emblematic or symbolic of like the waxing of men, like men are now coming to the fore, and the waning of the moon is like the elves. I'm trying to remember what the exact quote was, but he basically says like the sun and the moon are here, and it's kind of like, this is like now the time of men will be the time of sunlight, and the elves kind of fading or waning in Middle Earth. It's kind of like the moon. I thought that was kind of cool.
I'm trying to find that line. But the Noldor named them also Rana, the wayward, and Vasa, the heart of fire that awakens and consumes. For the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. That's beautiful. I didn't even like think about that one, but the moon cherishes the memory because it has like the light of the stars, because it has the light of the tree in it, right? And yeah, that's nice. Thanks,
also
Dan.
I think this tells us that now the men are rising, right?
Yes, right. Yeah, the sun is set as a sign for the awakening of men. Yeah, the fire of men that burns out brightly, way too fast, like
That's
sparks in the night.
Well, I'm going to finish with a quote that I thought was pretty cool. It's a really difficult sentence to read, though. We'll see if I get it right. So this is Manwë, and he's responding to the last words of Fëanor, that at least the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever. So he says, so this is Manwë speaking, he says, "So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other. Thus, even as Eros spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been." So it's a fascinating, we're kind of seeing some of the wisdom of Manwë, how he's closest in thought to Ero, because he's bringing up, in the midst of their grief about the fall of Fëanor, the greatest of the children of Ilúvatar, he's bringing up that by evil, there will be good that would not have been without the evil. So even, or as Ilúvatar says to Melkor at the beginning, you can try as you might, but everything you do will be turned to the good and to the song. So, in other words, you can't out judo the judo master. It turns every evil thing against you and uses it for the greater good. So I thought that was pretty cool, a reinforcement of the will of Ilúvatar and the way the world is structured according to.
And I think for the Doom of Mandos, there Manwë does say, "For the price could be no other." There's nothing else that could have been done in order to pay that price of like what Fëanor has done.
And then you have the eternal pessimist or realist Mando say, and yet remain evil. so Manwë says, evil shall yet be good to have been, but Mando says, and yet remain evil.
Yeah. Let's be careful and not call evil good,
right?
But it can be made in all things. We can work toward the good.
Also, he says, to me, Fëanor shall come soon. So basically,
he's dead.
Fëanor's not long for the world of Middle Earth anyway.
Yeah.
I think you really in that, what you were just talking about, how even it's for evil, it's good for it to have been, because good is going to come out of it. You really see Tolkien's Christian worldview, I guess.
I would agree.
Well, you see, I'm trying to think if you have that in any other major worldview or religion where you have a good God or a good creator, and he ordains in some sense evil to be, and that in the end it will only redound more to his glory, and it'll be for the good of those who love him.
I mean, I suppose you have hints of it in Lewis's space trilogy in Narnia. Not quite as explicit as this. And to be fair, this is the most explicit Tolkien gets. When you read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, you don't see or hear anything this explicit about evil being allowed for the sake of greater good to be brought out of it.
Yeah.
But I agree, it is showing Tolkien's Christian worldview pretty clearly.
Yeah. This chapter seems so small and short, but yet it feels like almost one of the deeper chapters.
I think it's quite deep. I think it has to do with what you mentioned, Jonathan, earlier, that it's part mythological. Mythology isn't there to just have tall tales about, it's one of the classic tropes that sometimes exists with moderns, is they say that people that believe in a god or a worldview have the supernatural in their worldview are just believing, in a silly way, the way, the Norse would invent a god of thunder because they were afraid of the thunder. It's not, for Tolkien, it's not that way at all.
No.
Mythology gets at a deeper root.
Right.
So I loved it. Next chapter is even shorter.
Yeah, and I think we're only going to do one chapter. I like that we take the time to go through it very deliberately, and so let's do that. Let's stick with Of Men next week, chapter 12. It's a nice short chapter name after the last one, Of the Sun and the Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. And now we get Of Men. Not much to say about them.
As short as you can get, 5 letters.
That's right. So we'll move on to that next week. Before we close out, though, we have our
If You Like Tolkien.
And Michael, I think today you have something you're going to show us.
Right behind us, or right behind me anyway. So this is a illustrated version, as I think most people that listen to the channel, or people may or may not know.
Illustrated version of what?
This is The Hobbit. So, and it's illustrated with Alan Lee, by Alan Lee. So it has all these great images and pictures. I'll flip to 2 of them so to just show examples. So these are Alan Lee's watercolors. So I'm always on the lookout for good editions of the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So you have I can't tell actually if I'm showing well.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
So this is the Carrock, the landing on the Carrock of Gandalf and the Hobbit and the dwarves, and then you have things like the Smaug attacking the mountainside. So Alan Lee is one of the best artists when it comes to Tolkien, and has a very fairy story-esque look to him. And so this is a beautiful version. So if anyone has kids and they would like to read they like to read Tolkien to the kids, or they would like to try, this is a great edition to start with.
Yeah. I got really lucky. A couple of years ago, I was just cruising through Barnes and Noble, and they had that in there in the bargain bin. I'm like, yes, It was, $5 or $6 or something. I'm like, okay.
Nice.
You didn't buy us a copy?
I didn't know you at the time,
I know.
I should have had some foresight.
Yeah, actually, I don't even know if I have that copy. Hold on. Let me see.
Would it be under the red light or the blue light?
Yeah, I don't think I have that one. I'm going to have to go get that one. Yeah, no, maybe that's why my kids don't want to read it with me, because all I'm doing is the one without the pictures. and I don't give them candy like you do, Michael. So
that is my... I felt bad about that response. I felt like I was going on and on.
No, this is in our Discord channel with our patrons, which is what a great segue. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. Yeah, so we talk about a lot of things there. One of them is, how does Michael get all of his 74 children to read the Hobbit.
Something like that. I lose count.
It's just nine. Yeah, and so we have a Discord channel. It's at thewandering.com/patron. You can become a patron there, and you get access to our Discord channel. We'll have an extended podcast. We will have. You can do comments, and we have message board, and we do about bi-weekly, once every 2 weeks or so. We'll do a live video chat within Discord as well. The only way to get access to that is to become a patron, a supporter of us, and we're always thinking more into this, and we want to do more and more. So the more support we get, the more we can do. So we appreciate your support. And if you go to thewandering.com/patron, it's $4 a month. First month is free, so you can cancel if you don't like it, and we're okay with that. But if you can, great. We would love to see more folks joining us. It's a lot of fun. And we're so glad that right now we can discuss without having the Rings of Power floating over us.
You keep bringing it up, man. I completely forgot about it.
I'm so sorry. I know. You went and you grabbed your pipe weed and you sat down and read Tolkien for a good 72 hours before you could wash the stench off. Anyway. All right. Well, so thanks for being with us on this episode of Window on the West, when we get back into the Silmarillion. Next week we'll do Of Men, and we'll also we'll talk about what we'll do next, because it's a short chapter. Maybe we'll throw in a few more things next week, because I'm not sure how much to talk about. It's been a while since I've thought about that one chapter that I read through in like 3 minutes once, but we'll go to it. So Of Men, chapter 12, the Silmarillion, and we will see you next week on Window on the West.
All right.
Hey, Carol.
See ya.